So we are continuing in Mark, and this morning we'll be in Mark chapter 6, verses 30 through 44. Many of you know it as the account of Jesus feeding the 5,000. So I'm going to go ahead and read, and then we're going to take a pass-through from the perspective of the disciples, and then we'll take a pass-through again, kind of from the perspective of Jesus. The apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. And when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered them, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat?" And he said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they had found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he commanded them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and by 50s. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing, and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. And those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. First, we're going to focus our attention on the disciples. They had been out doing what Jesus had commanded them, taking nothing with them and proclaiming the good news, casting out demons, healing the sick. Starting in verse 30, the apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place to rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. So the disciples have just wrapped up a powerful time in their ministry alongside Jesus, where they were fully reliant on God and those they were ministering to have their needs met. They were rather tired from all that they had done: miracles, preaching, teaching. It seems that upon returning, there is still quite a crowd following Jesus around. So much so that they don't have the time and space to care for their own bodies. So Jesus gathers them to himself and invites them away with him to have a much-needed rest. Verse 32, and they went away in a boat to a desolate place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. I can imagine at least a few of the disciples probably felt sort of disappointed, maybe even frustrated by the crowd's pursuit. They were just trying to find some peace and quiet and get a much-needed rest from the hustle and bustle of daily life alongside Jesus. They were likely looking forward to the relief that would come once they were somewhere quiet. I often find myself eagerly waiting for a break. Don't you know what that's like? With 4 little kids in our house, it can be anything except for quiet. I get tired. I get overwhelmed by the near constant sounds, needs to be met. Sometimes I think if I can just keep it together until the weekend, and then I'll get a little break, and I'll be refreshed, and then I can keep going. I run myself on the ragged edge of burnout, just scraping by one weekend at a time. Levi and I recently took the kids camping beside the Manistee River. And if you know us, we love to be outside. I find being immersed in God's creation so peaceful, so relaxing. Getting away from the noise of TVs and dogs barking and traffic going by. And just being able to slow down and change our family's pace is so soothing to me. I love listening to the crackle of a campfire late at night, or wading into a cold stream and just letting the water ripple around me. It's like my own little slice of heaven. Now, I don't know if you've ever taken little kids on vacation before, but they have a tendency to throw wrenches in plans for peace and quiet. Between asking for snacks, their little bottomless pits, squabbling amongst themselves, and the near infinite trips to the outhouse, the peace and quiet that I was hoping for just didn't seem nearly as peaceful nor as quiet as I had dreamed. It was still an enjoyable experience nonetheless, and I will continue to take them and have taken them since, but it didn't provide the reset that I had hoped it would. And I quickly found myself back in the same rut again once I returned home. You see, the truth is, we just can't really escape completely. I was searching for an escape from my stressors rather than a retreat. I was running instead of turning to the one who meets my needs in the midst of them. I was and am completely powerless to refill my own tank. It is easy to fall into the mindset of just holding out for a vacation, a raise, a bigger house, a newer car, whatever it is, waiting for our situation to change so that we can finally have some peace about whatever is stressing us. Resting is certainly a part of what we need, and trying to better our circumstance is not a bad thing, but it's not the complete picture. Jesus calls the disciples to himself to rest. The problem is, we can be more concerned with what we are getting away from rather than who we are going to rest with. And the who we're going to rest with makes all the difference. So after Jesus had taught the crowd, the same crowd that beat the disciples to their vacation spot, for the better part of the day, the disciples saw a need arising as the hours grew late. Skipping ahead to the middle of verse 35, they say, "This is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." Jesus instructs the disciples to handle the matter, and they respond appropriately bewildered. "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat?" We don't have the recording to prove it, but I know an exasperated tone would have passed my lips, asking this as a rhetorical question. Perhaps the one who said it really was just asking for clarification, but it seems apparent to me that they didn't have that kind of cash laying around. Remember, Jesus sent them on mission with no money in their belts. Don't take an extra tunic, don't take any food. Not to mention the logistics of going from this desolate place into all the little towns around and back again with food for over 5,000 people. This was supposed to be the disciples' vacation. They were going away to rest, but this was shaping up to be a lot of work for them and not so much peace and quiet. Honestly, I would be a little upset. Beyond being frustrated with their situation, they simply did not have the means to meet such a great need. They didn't have the time or the space to meet their need for rest and solitude. And they didn't have the money or the resources to meet everyone else's needs either. And this, unfortunately, is a very common human thing. Even in our times of rest, we don't really rest. Ecclesiastes chapter 2 puts it this way. In verse 22, it says, "So what do people get in this life for all their hard work and anxiety? Their days of labor are filled with pain and grief. Even at night, their minds cannot rest. It is all meaningless." So that's the bad news. We, like the disciples, find ourselves unable to meet our needs. The good news, however, is that they are in the company of someone who can. They just need to shift their focus. So let's turn our focus now to Jesus. First, we see him display care for the disciples' physical and spiritual need for rest. So he invites them to come with him somewhere quiet. But then, in verse 34, Jesus perceives the need of the crowd. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. We're told Jesus has compassion on this crowd. Why? Because they're like sheep without a shepherd. Mark is keying into Old Testament imagery of God's people being like sheep who will be picked off by predators, get lost, or starve to death in the wilderness without a shepherd to guide them. The reality is, the crowd is utterly lost and hopeless as sheep in the wilderness. Without Jesus, so are the disciples. So are we. Seeing the crowd's need, he begins to fulfill their appetite for him with teaching. We don't know the exact content of his words to them, but what Mark tells us is that it was many things. It seems to me that the focus isn't on what exactly was taught, but who was doing the teaching. Recall that while he fasted in the wilderness and Jesus was tempted by Satan, Jesus quotes Deuteronomy chapter 8. People do not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Our great need, first and foremost, is spiritual food. In the gospel according to John, Jesus would reveal to the same crowd the very next day the deeper meaning of his teaching. They came seeking physical bread, and Jesus told them, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry again." As Christians, we realize he's not speaking about a rumbling in our belly, but more of a grumbling in our soul, yearning for what is missing. We are satisfied in our spiritual bellies when we meet with Jesus. So after the crowd's hunger for Jesus had been quelled, their physical need for food was brought to the attention of him, as we covered earlier. The exchange between Jesus and the disciples peaks when he asks the disciples not what they're lacking, like 200 denarii worth of bread and a little bit of peace and quiet, but instead what they have. He said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they had found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. Jesus did not ask them what it is that they need. He asked them what they already have. It is not our job to determine what we need, because frankly, we don't even know half the time what it is that we need. In our humanness, we can confuse needs as basic as food and water. An article published in the Seattle Times about hunger and thirst confusion says we don't actually wait to feel hungry or thirsty before we start eating and drinking. Instead, we eat and drink because we're bored, because we like the taste, because everyone else is, or because we think we might get hungry or thirsty soon. And the near constant availability of foods and beverages and multiple social situations that encourage eating and drinking make disregarding and eventually confusing hunger and thirst easy to do. In a recent study, individuals responded appropriately by drinking water when they were thirsty but not hungry only 2% of the time. They responded inappropriately 62% of the time. In other words, they did not eat and drink when they were hungry and thirsty. They ate or drank when they weren't hungry or thirsty. They drank when they were hungry but not thirsty, and they ate when they were thirsty but not hungry. We are obviously capable of being confused by what it is that we need. We just know that deep down in our inner being that we need something. If you had asked me, or had asked the disciples, what it was that we needed in the situation with the crowd, I likely would have said 200 denarii worth of bread and some peace and quiet. And I would have been wrong. Why? Because we get too fixated on what it is that we lack, rather than what we possess. And what we possess is the presence of the one who can actually give us what we truly need. I'm not turning this into a count your blessings moment. Although practicing gratitude for what we have is good, I will acknowledge that what the disciples have in their hands is not a whole lot. 5 loaves of barley bread and 2 fish may have been enough to divide amongst the 12 disciples and Jesus for a snack. But in no uncertain terms was this enough food by any human conception to feed a multitude of this size. And yet, in the presence of Jesus, somehow it is. Our God feeds his people spiritually, but also physically. In 1 Kings chapter 17, Elijah, among others, are miraculously fed by a widow whose flour and oil just refuse to run out for many, many days, despite her initial claim that she had only enough to make a small meal for herself and her son and then keel over dead. Was she lying? Absolutely not. God provided a way. In 2 Kings chapter 2, in 2 Kings chapter 4, Elisha tells someone to feed 100 men with 20 loaves and a sack of grain. The unnamed man opposite Elisha seems flummoxed by the proposition, but obeys anyway, and God made a way. Consider also the manna that God caused to fall from the sky to feed the Israelites in the wilderness. Each of these stories demonstrate God's ability to meet our need square in the face of our lacking. The next thing I'd like to bring our focus to is the way Jesus involves us in the miracle. In verse 39, he said, "Then he commanded them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups, by hundreds and by 50s. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing, and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all." Jesus calls us to participate. He could have done any number of things, miraculous or otherwise, to meet their real bodily need for food. But instead, he invited the disciples and the crowd in by asking them to participate. He has the crowd sit down in groups, perhaps not sure what to expect, yet they obey without all of the answers. And he has the disciples bring him their meager rations so that he can give it back to them with his blessing to meet the needs of the crowd. Catch that Jesus didn't give the food to the crowd himself. It's not because he's impersonal. He's obviously very well acquainted with touching people who are sick or in need. But it's because it's for our good and his glory that we get to be involved. We get to surrender our not much to him so that he can turn it into a miraculous encounter. He chooses to work through imperfect people who lack much to display his goodness. "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." There was a long time in my life where I kept telling God that I'll participate more when I have more time or more money or I have more space to host a Bible study or when my kids are older and they don't need me so much. What I was really saying was, I don't trust you when you say you are enough, God. I was trying to rely far too heavily on my understanding of my own meager resources for what could be accomplished. Sure, ignoring logistical concerns is unwise, but the call of Proverbs 3:5 is to trust in the Lord with all of your heart and lean not on your own understanding. So moving from a place of fear due to my own inadequacy to trusting that if God is in it, the time, the space, the resources, and the energy will multiply as loaves and fishes. I submit to God and yield all of the not much I have, focusing instead on Jesus, whose power is perfected in my weakness. And there is peace and quiet in my soul when I trust the Lord rather than myself to meet my needs. So take inventory of what you have. Examine what you possess. Is it time to volunteer, funds to give, talents to use, food to share, space to host? Even if in your estimation it is not enough, and then examine your heart and determine if you are willing to give it to Jesus so that he can bless it and use it for his purposes. Finally, the narrative arc concludes with the summation of everyone who ate that day. But pay attention to the disciples once again. Verse 42, and they all ate and they were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. And those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. We are told that everyone ate and ate their fill, and that it was 5,000 men who ate. Other accounts specify that this number excludes the women and the children. So the crowd was surely quite large. It's a very impressive feat. But what I find most striking is the way the disciples find themselves holding baskets after everyone's been fed. They began this account weary and with hardly enough food for their party. But giving what little they had to the Lord at his request, each of the 12 is left holding a whole basketful. As the hymn says, "'Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus, just to take him at his word." If God is asking you for something, it is far sweeter to give it to him than it is to try to hold on to it for yourself. Because we don't have the means to provide abundantly for ourselves like the Good Shepherd does anyway. Dallas Willard wrote a book titled Life Without Lack, and it's a meditation on Psalm 23. It deeply explores what it means to be within the care of the Good Shepherd. I'm going to read Psalm 23 with some of his commentary on it mixed in to highlight the compassion and the care of Jesus and what it means to be in his flock. The Lord is my shepherd. I am in the care of someone else, and I'm not the one in charge. I shall not want. Some translations say, I have all that I need. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. What kind of sheep lies down in a green pasture? One that has eaten its fill. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. The broken depths of our souls are healed and regenerated, and as a natural expression of our renewed inner nature, we walk in paths of righteousness. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. The complete sufficiency of the life without lack, without fear, is based upon the presence of God. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Since we love our enemies, as Jesus instructed, we would not feast upon a delicious meal in their presence and let them stand there hungry. The abundance of God is the abundance of God's provision and safety in my life is so great, I would invite them to enjoy what God has prepared for me. You anoint my head with oil. My cup is full. Is that what that says? No, my cup overflows. My cup runneth over. I have more than my cup will hold. So much that I can be as generous as my shepherd is without fear of ever running out. So much so that I am convinced, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This is a description of the eternal life available to us now in the kingdom of the heavens. The abundant with God life that comes from following the shepherd, where we dwell and abide with God in the fullness of his life, a life in which all the promises of Christ's gospel are realized. Trusting the Lord to shepherd you is key for your provision of your needs, but also for your spiritual peace and quiet. In all of your circumstances, the shepherd is beside you, leading you and tending to your needs. But you have to trust him to let him be your shepherd. Because after all that had happened, the disciples still didn't get it. And they didn't trust that they were truly in his care. And if they didn't get it, I wouldn't dare think any more highly of myself. In verse 51 and 52, after the conclusion of the feeding of the 5,000 people, the disciples go across the sea by boat, and Jesus meets them partway, walking on the water. Mark writes, they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. And then again in Mark chapter 8, after Jesus again performs another similar miracle by feeding 4,000 people, the disciples still don't understand. They're once again on a boat and forgot to pack enough bread for themselves, which I find absolutely bewildering that they could forget bread of all things. And they begin to discuss how they will manage with only one loaf amongst themselves. In verse 17, and Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up?" How many baskets, church? 12, one for each of them. They went from scraps to feasting to the point that God gave each of them a takeout box full of leftovers, and they still forgot. The worship team can come forward and figure out what you're going to play. We need to guard ourselves against forgetting the miracles that God has performed in our lives and losing focus of the one who meets our needs. When we lose focus, we try to shepherd ourselves and stray from the care of the true shepherd. If it's possible for the ones who walk side by side in the flesh with Jesus to miss it, then it's possible for us to miss it. Testify of the goodness of God. Encourage one another with your stories of God's faithfulness, and ask God to give you opportunities to trust him more and more, and ask him to give you the faith to go with it, so that you can declare from the bottom of your heart, "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever." So let it be our prayer that when we have a need for rest or resources or anything else, we turn our focus to Jesus and are made perfect in the midst of our lack because of God who meets our great needs with enough leftovers to spill out and bless those around us. Lord, thank you for this time together. I ask that your word would move hearts and minds, and that you would call us to a greater measure of surrender to you. I ask that you would show us what we have so that we can offer it to you, so that it can receive your blessing, and that it can be used to meet the needs of those around us, God. You make us perfect in the midst of our weakness. So thank you for our weakness, Lord, so that we can boast in you. Show us what we have, Lord. Show us your providing hand. In Jesus' name.